Hello again. Ever since scientists and educationalists began testing intelligence and assessing cognitive ability, it has been observed that Africans and those whose families have their origins in Africa score poorly on all the measures used for finding out how bright people are. As long ago as 1869, Francis Galton, the man who pioneered the use of fingerprints for identification, a cousin of Charles Darwin by the way, wrote that the number among the Negroes of those men whom we should call half-witted men is very large. In 1916, Louis Terman, the man who devised the first modern IQ tests, remarked that those who were at that time described as mental defectives were far more common among black people than white. I give references in the description to this video for these statements. Both Galton and Terman believed that the disproportionate number of black children with learning difficulties was part of their genetic heritage, nothing to do, in other words, with education or culture. These days, many people hold a contrary opinion. That is to say, they think that the large number of black children with learning difficulties is caused by racists wrongly identifying black children as having these difficulties. In 2018, an Oxford professor published a study called Ethnic Disproportionality in the Identification of Special Educational Needs in England, Extent, Causes and Consequences. He attributed the high number of black children with special educational needs to the fact that some black Caribbean children may be suffering an inappropriate or narrowed curriculum from unwarranted over-identification, particularly in secondary school. In other words, those testing them had racist preconceptions, or the tests themselves were culturally biased against the black children. Moderate learning difficulties, by the way, the expression used in that report, is the classification which was a century ago covered by the word moron, which was at that time a clinical term. We sometimes forget that some of the pejorative terms for people with low intelligence, moron, imbecile, idiot and so on, were once actually clinical terms with precise meanings. It's curious that as far back as we look, black children have supposedly been more prone to white children and those from Asia to having learning difficulties. This is the case across the entire world for the last 150 years, with one single small exception. That is the American state of California, where since 1979 black children have been no more likely to present with learning difficulties than any other children. How has this educational miracle been achieved? Surely a great deal of money must have been spent on boosting the achievement of this one group. Not a bit of it. It didn't cost a penny. In 1979, a group of black psychologists became annoyed at seeing how many children in California being diagnosed as having learning difficulties were black, and they decided to do something about it. They chose one particular child as a test case and went to court, claiming that the IQ tests being used were culturally biased against African Americans, and that this ethnic group should not be assessed as needing special educational provision using such tests. The judge in what is now known as the Larry P. case agreed, and from that day, 42 years ago, to this, it has been unlawful in California to use IQ tests to assess whether or not black children need special education. Nobody else mind, only black children. One thing worth remarking is that this cultural bias does not seem to affect any other group. Koreans and Chinese, for instance, are less likely to be thought in need of special educational provision after having taken these IQ tests than are white children. In some mysterious and wholly unexplained fashion, the tests only seem to discriminate against the children of African Americans. I give a link above to the piece about the Larry P. case. It is such a bizarre situation that some viewers might otherwise be tempted to think that I've dreamt up the whole thing.